So it's a good moment to give a foundation for our next speaker, right?
Yeah, so let's welcome Paweł, Wilkosz. Paweł is a big fan of diving, and he shared with me that once during his diving, he dived in the company of 2 sharks. He's here with us, so he survived, obviously.
Yes,
that bad.
wasn't that bad. On a day-to-day life in the office, Paweł is a solution architect and actually architecture freak to such a degree that he's going to be telling us how your architectural decisions and selection of architecture may determine what kind of framework you want to use. So let's welcome Paweł Wilkosz. Come on in.
Thank you, everybody. So thanks for coming to my presentation. Maybe a few questions to you before I start. So how many developers are here in audience? Okay, just a few. And how many Scrum Masters? Also product owners? Or some business representatives? Oh, we've got one. So it's perfect. It's perfect audience for me. Okay, so the subject of my presentation is how microservice architecture aid agile development. And I've chosen those words not in the random order. So I'm not going to tell you that the story maybe. So I was in a trouble because my project was run out of time. So I lose my budget, then I adopt agile methodologies and everything was perfectly fine, so I win. No, it's not that way. I'm also not going to convince you that the Agile is the best methodology if you'd like to do the good software craftsmanship. It's also not that way. Why? Because in my story that I will tell you later, I just stopped doing any Agile methodologies and I win. But in fact, I was trying to run away from all of these practices, but I suddenly find out that those practices just standing just behind me. Okay, so a few words about myself. I'm Paweł. Since tomorrow, I've been working for Motorola for 9 years, I think. It's quite a lot of time. And my story has begun a few years back when I was at a university. So I was a very enthusiastic when first time I was reading about an Agile, Scrum, and any other lightweight methodologies. During that time, probably nobody in Krakow was doing it. There was just only one, let's say, the community where we can share our knowledge. It was a Polish Agile user group. Does anybody know about that? So it was some kind of the underground group that we met once a week, if I correctly remember, and we were trying to share our knowledge from some articles, books, maybe not an experience because, as I know, nobody in Krakow was doing it. But, I was very positive when I was reading about all of these values that can bring to the company during the software development. So I promised to myself, when I joined my professional career, the first thing what I tell to my boss is start doing it, because it really works. I feel that and I believe in that. So when I joined to my first company, everything was perfectly fine. I had a good boss. So he said, go ahead. So we're trying to, together with my friends, trying to influence our software development life cycles with the Agile development, garnering some knowledge, some experience. Then I joined the Motorola, and it was even better because I also joined a team which was quite independent from each other. So we also have some space for experiments, right? And everything was fine till the day when somebody said that right now we are doing really Agile, right? So we are going to introduce a SAFe, we are going to introduce Scrum teams. If you want, if you don't want, whatever, just start doing it. Okay, so I do believe in one value that was mentioned in yesterday's keynotes. What is standing behind an Agile? Do not be late, right? Do not be late with your project. So when I just find out that nothing wrong has happened if I didn't finish my task within one sprint, because everybody around just saying it, no worries, just move it to another sprint, or another sprint, and it was still on the time. It was some kind of the bullshit, right? So I stopped believing that this methodology can bring me any benefits. Till the time when my project coordinator came to me and said that, hey, Paweł, we've got a new project that we need to develop, but we've got the two non-functional requirements. The first requirement is that the system must be highly scalable. The second requirement is it must be deployed into the cloud, whatever it is. Okay, after the short evaluation, I've prepared some basic architecture. I knew that we need to realize this in the microservices, otherwise we are going to fail, with the scalability, of course, and deployment. And I came to my project coordinator and told to him, okay, I'm in, but under one condition. We are not doing any Agile, Scrum, Safe, Lean, whatever, right? He said, wow, that's interesting. So how are you going to drive these projects? How are you going to, for example, make some basic planning or see if we are on a track? Okay, let's see. So we can prepare some Kanban board, whatever, right, to make you feel better. But please do not organize any stand-ups, any retrospective with toys, any sprint plannings, and so on and so on and so on, right? Okay, so here my journey has begun. The first challenge that we met was a team. Maybe I will give you a couple of things that to better understand the background of it. So in microservice architecture, the main idea is to divide an application on the very basic single functions, right? So every single functions need to be atomic, realize only one functionality, and should be totally independent from each other. So only that way we can make some scalable. To not break an NDA rules, so let's assume we are developing some bookstore. So for example, one big microservice was responsible on handling some HTTP requests from the web browser and nothing more, just handling the post, get, put, and authenticate methods, nothing more. Another microservice was responsible for putting the stuff into the database and nothing more, right? So if something is coming, I'm just writing to the database, that's all. Another one is responsible for making some search on a database. So prepare some queries, for example, via titles, and nothing more. And another one, for example, to make some folders, catalogs, and categorize some books in this bookstore, and nothing more. Of course, all of them are totally independent. Actually, we need to design some communication between each others, but they can be deployed, developed, tests totally separately, right? So the manager come to me and said that, okay, so how are you going to divide the people into the teams? Because we've got quite a lot of people in this project, and you just set up such approach. So we're just putting everybody to develop everything what is over here, or we are going to divide these people somehow. So my answer was that, this small piece of the functionality can be realized for no more than 3 up to 5 people, right? Because it's enough. It's very simple function. So we don't have to spend more time and more people working on it. And moreover, because those functions are totally independent, so we also avoid the situations when we need to make a communication between the teams that's working in different time zones. Like, for example, my team in Poland is working on a functionality number 1, and somebody from US or from Asia is working on a microservice number 2, because it's independent, so the communications is just a little, right? Okay, so we make some deal. So we divide the people per function, per microservice. We assigned 3 up to 5 people to the one team, and we fixed the communication between them. So just remind me what the Scrum Guide is saying about the team size. 3 to 9 people, exactly. And also he's saying that the role of the Scrum Master is, coordinate the communication between each other. But we assigned or create such teams, such small teams, not because we read this in a Scrum guide, but because this architecture allow us to do this. And of course, lead us. Next one, release. When I was working on some monolithical system, the release was always some issue. Why was the issue? Because we need to fulfill some agreements, we need to integrate all the components to the one big system. We need to perform some integrations tests, some validations, make some procedure, some audits, security, whatever, right? So everybody was very scary about doing the release. So let's go back to this approach. I was telling you that every microservice realizes just only one functionality. And I will add another point to this. Those functionality can be developed within 2 up to 3 weeks, because if you need to spend the time on, for example, making some HTTP handler, so 2 weeks for 3 people or 5 people is just enough to complete this within that time period. And also, after those 3 weeks, this functionality is totally completed. What else you can do this, right? If you have an authentication method, if you have getting some request via HTTP or putting some request to the HTTP server, what else you can develop? Not so much. So every single function was ready after the 2 or 3 weeks, right? So if it is ready, why not to push it to the production? It's just simple. I just finished my job, I want to release it. So it was very naturally in our team that when we finish working on some microservice within 2 weeks, we are just release it. Of course, there was a question. The system is not completed. But it's exactly what Michał said on his presentations on the conclusion. Do not release the whole system, right? So release often when some part of the functionality is ready. So it's exactly what we did. And the question was, okay, but the customer could find out that the system is not completed, so we have to make him more clear what is released, what is not. Exactly, it didn't work that way, because the customer exactly see what kind of the microservices he has on a production, right? So if there was no database, so he couldn't expect that he's able to store the permanent data, right? So we start doing the frequently release, not because the Scrum guide was saying you have to do this, but because we are ready. Okay, the scalability. I was telling you that one of the advantages of using a microservice is independency, right? So I can scale it whatever I want. So if my one function doesn't independ from each other, so I can just simply multiply it, right? So the first requirement that came us from the customer was that, okay, so I would expect that in my bookstore, I can handle 1 million of the users per 1 day. Okay, so it was a very clear requirement for us. We need to multiply the HTTP microservice twice, or I don't know, make 3 or 4 separate instances. Of course, everything was under the Kubernetes control, so multiplying those instances is just putting the number 4 or number 5 into the config file, that's all, right? But after that, when we release it, the customer came to us and said that, okay, guys, it works right, because I've checked it, but the database is empty, right? So even if I go to the production, so nobody will not buy anything from me because I don't have any offer. So let's switch to the requirements a little bit, and please also handle the same scalability for putting the stuff to my database from my suppliers. Also the 1 million per 1 day. When I was working on the monolithical system, every changes that came to us from the field or from the customer make the team very angry, right? Because we have to redesign our application. It was not that approach. The customer doesn't know what he really wants, and so on and so on and so on, right? In such situation, the situation was very simple. We just need to replace the config file of our deployment, and it was performed automatically. So those approach was better when we are talking about the non-functional requirements, right? In such case, the scalability. And we respond on the market needs, not because the Scrum Guide was saying that, because it was very simple to do this in this approach. Oh, stop working. Okay, continuous integrations and continuous deployment, especially continuous deployment. So if you have ever trying to prepare some Docker container or Docker image, so after first time when you do this manually and you have to repeat it again, also manually, probably you are not gonna do this. So you write a script or write a Docker file, because the process of preparing the proper image with the proper settings is very boring, right? So just imagine you have to do this with one microservice, with one Docker image. Okay, so I can do this, right? But if we are talking about 100 microservices, 500 microservices, so the situation isn't that simple, because nobody is going to do this. So everybody are lazy, so everybody wants to automate everything what is boring. And it was exactly the same in my team. So after first manual deployment, the team decided we are not going to do this by our hands. Let's spend a little bit time during our iteration to prepare a proper config file and proper procedures, like compiling the code, putting this to the container or to the image, setting up all environment variables, and putting this to the productions, for example, to the Kubernetes environment, right? So that's why we create our own pipeline, not because the Scrum Guide was saying you have to integrate your code often and put the automation everywhere you can do, and because the team was lazy and was easy to do this with this approach. That's the two factors. And moreover, when we decide to push our changes into production environment, because after those 2 or 3 weeks period, the functionality was ready. So everything what we had to do is to just swap the config file, right? To not promote the build into the testing or QA stage, but to promote into the production stage. That's all. Business, that's interesting. You know that some of the project here in Motorola, we deliver to our internal customer. So it is very easy to arrange the people who will be working on the system that are we developing, right? So it's also quite easy just to invite such person to our meeting room for a demo and present what we have done. But all the time we receive the feedback that everything is okay, so I'm positive, let's do this, right? Go ahead, guys. Yes, realize it. Okay, so you have an improvement, I'm okay with that, until it was really on the production stage. Then the customer was really complained that, okay, I was saying that is okay, but you know the market condition has changed. I was saying it was okay, these functions, but I wanted to use it in a different way because I can fulfill my business as well, right? The one missing factor here was the money. So the customer in the monolithic approach didn't know how much money he's going to spend on the operational process. I'm not saying about how much money he need to put into our pockets because we are developing the project, but how many codes those applications is going to generate when it is on a production stage, right? Because he didn't know until he ran it and started using it. Because our approach was to deploy the applications into the Azure environment. So the Azure has one of the very friendly function. He can calculate the cost per service, or per function, or per resource that are you going to utilize. So after the first iterations, when we deploy our project, the customer was exactly aware how much money he's going to spend next week, 2 weeks in the future, 1 month in the future, and so on. So he was really interested in what we are exactly doing, what kind of the features are generate so many costs, or what kind of the feature still we have to we can develop because it's costless, right? So it was very easy just to arrange our customer into the real planning. Because when we are saying, okay, we are going to adopt the Cosmos DB here in our approach, and can generate thousands of dollars every month. So he said, no, it shouldn't work that way because I also lost my money, so there is no business here. Okay, so it's not a database, so let's talk about the different approaches, right? So what we can do differently. For example, we can propose you to, the big file store in the storage. He said, okay, so how it will work? So it will work on that way, right? So here you have a new URL, you can download your stuff, and based on the calculator, we can predict that, the storage will cost you X dollars, not Y dollars, like in Cosmos DB. So he was really involved, into process of the planning for the next step or next stage of the creation of a microservices, right? And so we are able to arrange our customer, not because he also believed in the Agile values, but we are talking about the real money that he's going to spend. And a fast feedback. The feedback from the market is always important, but the developers really don't care about that, right? They prefer to know how the services or the functions are utilized by the customer than if the customer likes the system or not, right? Yeah, so here what is missed is some kind of the statistics or the telemetry, how the system is utilized. I will give you some example. In a monolithic system, when we receive the defect, for example, from the QA team, so there was always some kind of the discussion. Okay, it is really high important defects or it's low important defects. If there was some kind of the keywords like emergency, oh yeah, it's very important, right? So we have to fix it. And nobody knows that the customer is not using this feature at the field, so maybe it's not that critical because such scenario will not gonna happen in the field, right? But based on the keywords, we classify the defects, because we didn't have such knowledge what kind of the features are really important for the customer and how customer is using them. Because in this approach, we deploy our system into the cloud. We had a lot of statistics and a lot of telemetry, what kind of the features, what kind of functions and microservice is used by our customers. So for example, when we find out that after the 1 month period of time, nobody is pushing anything into the database. So this service or this microservice is not such important for the customer. Of course, we have to protect it, right? Because if there's no database, there's no business at all, right? But, developing those interface, it's not so important than, for example, searching by some interesting books, right? Because it's utilized every day by thousands of hundreds of requests, right? So we are able to make a good priority for our backlog, right? Not because Trondheim was saying that, and because we've got a proper telemetry and the proper statistics that the deployment platform brought us. Okay, it was just only the few examples. To summarize what I wanted to tell you during this presentation, I want to share with you the sentence that my friend Piotr Gruszczyk told me a couple of years ago. He said that, stop doing Agile, be Agile. And I hope that if you really set up the proper assignment for your system architecture and you follow by those rules that good craftsmanship of software development is bringing to you, all those practices will be there. So you don't have to force your team to introduce stand-ups, introduce the retrospectives because somebody on a blog say that it can improve your team performance. No, if you do that good software craftsmanship, then all of those practices will come by itself. So you don't have to arrange anybody who will check if we've got a meeting minutes after some retrospectives and so on. That's all. Thank you, guys.
Any questions?
All very interesting. I am very interested to know, like, how often was that feedback? You remember the feedback you're talking about, right? So how often did you get the feedback? And I know that sometimes the developers, really what makes sense to them is that, whether the application or they're developing makes sense to the customer or not, right? Business results definitely goes to the business people. So how often was that feedback happening? And how did the teams incorporate that? Would like to know that.
Okay, so when you are talking about the feedback, there is two feedbacks that we received. The first one is for the real customer, and it was related of what kind of the services we want to arrange to our development. And it was done every 2-3 weeks when we start working on some microservice, because he wanted to know, how the bill will look like in the end of the month, right? And the feedback, when you're talking about the telemetry, so it's a real time. So we can just log into the portal and get this telemetry all the time when we want. Yeah. And how we align with that? So the feedback from the customer help us to make a better design for the next of the microservices. Like I said, if one of the components was too expensive for him, so we switched to another one. And the telemetry help us to think about the scalability of the microservices. We thought that, for example, we predict that this service will be utilized next month more than this month because we can see the trends. Like here is a time, here is a number of requests, and we know that this month this microservice handled such amount of the request, and this is his performance. So we know that after next deployment, we need to duplicate it because otherwise it's going to crash. So those feedback with the telemetry was a part of the development. From the telemetry was gathered automatically by the cloud. So, yeah.
Thank you for the presentation, Paweł. Based on your experience, so what are the main risks at this approach? Challenges, yes. Main risks and challenges.
Okay, so managing a lot of microservices is not that easy because you divide the system for very atomic functions, right? So especially when you find a bug and when you have to debug where the problem is, so it's very difficult to find out in such the ecosystem where the really problem is. So I think this is the big challenge.
Suppose this kind of situation arises, right? So the dependencies are definitely going to be there. So who takes care of the scenario in that risk?
Who scale it?
Yeah. So in this case, if this problem arises, right? So who takes care of the challenge in this thing? Like, because every team is focused on those microservices. So if this kind of challenge comes in, so how do you tackle that?
So when we are talking about the scalability, so we can do this on two different ways. By manual deployment, so we can describe, for example, in a Kubernetes file that does microservice need to be multiplied, or we expect the 3 or 4 instances, or we can make some rules on a server, like, for example, if some threshold is exceed, the numbers, so please duplicate this service.
Thank you.
Questions, anyone?
First there.
No. My question is, how do you integrate the whole system? Do you have a separate team for that or on production?
No, it was done by the same team, the group of people, let's say. And we've got different stages, like development stages when everybody can integrate whatever they want. We've got some kind of the QA stages, which is the duplicate of the production environment, and of course the production stage. So we was divided by the stages.
Janusz?
So, Paweł, correct me if I'm wrong. So I understood that the kind of agile behavior were derived from the proper technology and system design assumptions.
Yes.
So will such approach be working for everything, or any specific team is needed for that? So any comments about that?
That's a very good question. Because you know that I was starting to doing, I was decided to stop doing Agile after my frustration, and this project has come, right? So I just find out I was not doing an Agile, but Agile was just behind me. So to answer your question, if we need, if I understand, we need to have specific skill set of a people or something like that. We focus on a good software craftsmanship. So if you have people that are really liked what they do, right? Because they developing something important in the new technology, modern technology, and nobody's saying what they need to do. So I think such enthusiasm can be driven by the methodology, not otherwise. Because I couldn't expect that we can make it happen when, sorry for saying that, having some Scrum Master and, forcing that we have to be hurry and hey, guys come to some retrospective.
So
if you are developers, you know what I mean, right?
The last disagreement.
Just to summarize, so you need to engage team. It's the correct summary?
Sorry?
So just to summarize, you need to, for such approach, to engage the team, yes? So that's the good summary of
I
it?
think so.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you.
Thanks. I guess we have run out of time, so thank you for all the valuable questions and content presented.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.